Gracious God, open to us your word. Speak through it once again. Use it to shape us. Use it to make us your people. To be obedient to you and to follow you. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I started a new job in July. I've almost been in my current job almost a year. And my administrative assistant is a stereotypical millennial. Now, do you know what the word millennial means? Millennial roughly describes the group of people born between 1982 and somewhere around 1995, 96, in that range. And it is called generational science, and we're all divided up by generation into baby boomers. And I just fall short of being a millennial. I am officially a Gen X person. But she's a classic millennial. She posts a lot of selfies online. She drinks wine. She's just a quintessential millennial. And whenever I want to make fun of her, or I want to annoy her, I say in a sneering, snotty voice, "Ugh, millennials," and walk away. There is nothing that irks her more than when I do that. Now, you all laughed, which means that I can surmise one of three things. One, you have made similar comments. Two, you have posted one of those articles about millennials on Facebook. Or number three, you at one point in your life had thought to yourself, "Kids these days." And it's easy to do that. It's actually as old as human history. Early Greek philosophers are actually recorded as decrying the young people of their day. Their immaturity, their lack of judgment, their lack of focus. Any of this sound familiar? In the United States today, we have an entire media empire that is built upon criticizing, scorning, and mocking the next generation. And we see it all the time. We see it in news stories about college students. We see it and hear it in the derogatory term snowflake that's thrown out at anyone who's young and viewed as weak. And we see it in our self-righteous statements of "back in my day," preceded by some overly inflated statement about how difficult it was to be a kid when you were growing up. Let me ask you this. Why do we do this? Why do we do it? Well, I think there's a couple reasons we do it. One, sometimes it's funny. I love watching my administrative assistant get upset. It's just a game to me. It's fun. But I think sometimes it's simply because we realize that things are different and we don't understand it. But there's a problem with this. It's almost patently, provably false. And let me explain why. I was born in 1980, which put me hitting mid-teenage years in 1995. Now, I want you to guess. Compare the teen pregnancy rate between 1995 and 2017. Do you think it went up, it stayed the same, or it went down? You would be correct if you said it went down. Teen pregnancy rate today is actually at an all-time low. Other numbers that might surprise you. The percentage of teenagers who have smoked has dropped 69%. The percentage of teenagers who binge drink alcohol has dropped 50%. The percentage of teenagers who have even tried alcohol has dropped 21%. The teen pregnancy rate has dropped, are you ready for this, 59%. And the percentage of teenagers who have engaged in sexual activity has dropped 22%. Are you surprised? Most people are. After all, the media gets no credibility for telling you any of these numbers. But these numbers are verifiably true. Because every 2 years, the National Institutes for Health does an anonymous 10,000 student survey throughout the country. And they've been doing this survey for years, since 1972, on risky behaviors. So they have a data bank that's built over the last 40 years from which they can compare these numbers. And these, my friends, are simply the facts. In the Bible, we have a story of an older man writing to a younger boy. It's the story of Paul and Timothy. It's one of my favorite stories, actually. And it's one of my favorite because there is so much warm-heartedness and welcome in it. Hear these words. This is Paul writing to the younger Timothy. But stay away from godless myths that are passed down from the older women. Stay away from old wives' tales, they say. Train yourself for a holy life. While physical training has some value, training in holy living is useful for everything. It has promise for this life and for the life to come. This saying is reliable and deserves complete acceptance. We work and struggle for this. Our hope is set on the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially those who believe. Command these things and teach them. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young. Instead, set an example for the believers through your speech, behavior, love, faith, and by being sexually pure. The advice of an older man to a younger one. The advice providing him guidance for how to walk the road ahead. Today, on Graduate Sunday, I wanted to spend a few minutes reflecting on that passage and another that I'll come to, as you celebrate one graduate today, but a whole pew of graduates to come. Now, what I don't want to do is paint the students of today as models. Perfectly healthy, everything's great, perfect angels. They are not. In fact, one of the most troubling trends amongst adolescents and college students today is the rapid rise in those struggling with anxiety and depression-related issues. Now, talking about anxiety and depression is a difficult subject to get into anyway, because there's a host of factors involved. They're really complicated. And to be honest, I'm not trained as a psychologist, so I have very little business talking about them. But what we can say is the common threads of anxiety and depression are a loss of control, a sense that you don't have control, and a loss of hope for the future. Now, to be clear, in my last job, I worked full-time, basically, with teenagers. That was my job. That was my life. And of those years, I worked with about 250 kids over the course of 10 years. I had kids from every type of family who have struggled with anxiety and depression. I had kids from the healthiest, most affluent, well-to-do, everything is perfect on the outside families who struggled with anxiety and depression. I had kids that came from broken, struggling homes who struggled with anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression are not dependent on your socioeconomic or family health status. But what I did find out over and over and over again was that for those kids who struggled with anxiety and depression, for those kids who had strong connections to their peers and other adults, there was a marked difference in how they were able to cope with the anxiety and depression that they experienced. Let me explain a little bit with a brief story. I had one student of mine who struggled with anxiety and depression the whole way from middle school through high school. I knew it, he knew it, but here's the deal. We all knew it. And when he was having a bad day, when he was frustrated, when he was hurting, when things just weren't going his way, he had a group of people to tell, to talk to call or to text, to reach out to and say, hey, I'm having a bad day. I just need someone to talk to. Research has shown over and over and over again that for kids, regardless of their home situation, if they have a strong network of other adults and peers, they handle the issues of anxiety and depression far, far better. Now, here's what I want to ask you. Do any of you know of a group of people of which you can be a part of, regardless of your age, your socioeconomic status, whether you're good at sports or not, whether you're good at dancing or not, whether you're good at music or not? Do any of you know any organization of people that opens their doors once a week and says, hey, come on in? The church, right? The church. Now, and I'm going to go on a rant for the next minute, okay? It's not my script, but I can't help it. Here's the deal. We have decided as a church that we don't matter anymore. We look at a society that doesn't value us in the way that we once were, and that's true, and we've said, well, that's their problem, it's their loss. And you're right. You're absolutely right. But what I think sometimes we forget is that specifically for the children of our community, I don't just mean your church community, I mean your whole community, church is helpful and good. And there's research to back us up. They did research a number of years ago, in the late 90s, it came out. And it's called the 40 Developmental Assets. And it's a list of things that if a kid has 30 of them or more, there's a marked difference in their outcomes in life. Lower incarceration rates, better performance in school, better job outcomes, lower divorce rate, all those kind of things. And one of the things that research found and shows, and is still out there and is still valid, is that involvement in a faith community offered a host of those assets. Connection to other adults, a sense of belonging, a continued place of involvement, right? Think about this, right? Kids today grow up and they are in a lot of activities, and that's just part of life. But here's the deal. Those activities typically have a period in which they end, all right? I did cross-country and track in high school. Why? Because there were no cuts, all right? I'll be honest. There were no cuts on those teams. I could make the team by showing up. Okay? But the bottom line was this. I found a great connection with friends and other adults through the team. But at some point, my cross-country team days were over. Okay? In the same way, kids who play soccer have a great connection with friends and peers and adults and things like that, until they're not good enough to play soccer anymore. A lot of the activities that our kids are involved in are wonderful things, and I want them to be in them. My daughter is in gymnastics. She loves gymnastics. I love gymnastics. There's going to be a point at which the connection she's developed there will not last. But here's the deal. The church doors are always open. I look back on my own life, and from an early child to a crazy, awkward, weird, nerdy adolescent, into a still nerdy, kind of less weird version of college student, to a now slightly awkward and a little crazy adult, the church has always been there for me. Here's the thing I want you to understand. Kids today struggle with things that you and I didn't. If you had someone at school who didn't like you, when you got home, could they bother you? No. If they called, you hung up. And most of the time they didn't call. Right? You normally had to deal with annoying people only at school. Kids today, because of how our society is wired, can put up with that stuff 24/7. So, yes, kids today are not the same as you and I were. The challenges they face are not the same. They are different. In some ways, they're doing a lot better, at least than my generation was. But in some ways, they're struggling a lot more. And here's the truth. Being involved in church is good for kids. We have the research to back that up. It's good for them. It's good for their families. It's good for their parents. It is good for them. And parents are crucially important. So many parents, when their kids get to be teenagers, go, well, I don't matter anymore. Oh, yes, you do. You actually matter more than you even realize. But as kids get older, as they get to be teenagers, they need other adults to step in. They need other adults to be for them. What they need is they need a lot less ridicule, a lot less disdain. They need a lot less Facebook articles ridiculing them. And they need a lot more adults who are ready to say, I am for you. They need cheerleaders. They need supporters. They need people to walk beside them through life's challenges. They need people to pull them up out of the ditch when they've made a big mistake. And they need people to celebrate with them through life's greatest victories. In short, they need people who are committed to them in good and bad, in the victory and the defeat. In a few minutes, you all will celebrate and honor one of your own who has reached the end of her high school journey and is preparing for the next step. Now, if any of you remember your senior year of high school, at least within the last 20, 30, 40 years, the question, at least I always got, and I know I always ask, is, so what are your plans? Right? And high school seniors typically get sick of this question because they get asked it all the time, right? What are your plans? What are your plans? What are your plans? Where are you going to college? What are you doing after you graduate? When are you going to get your life together? Right? We ask them all the time. And I do it too. What are your plans? I don't know what my plans are. But there's another scripture that I want to point us to today. And it comes from Proverbs. And this text in Proverbs is an interesting one. And let me read it to you. This is paraphrased from Eugene Peterson. It says this: humans make fancy and elaborate plans, but God has the last word. Humans are satisfied with what looks good. God seeks what is good. Put God in charge of your work, and what you've planned will take place. The message here is simple to all of us. Planning begins and ends with prayer. Now, I'm not saying you need to plan out with prayer your trip to Giant Eagle. You can probably manage that one without the Lord's help. But major decisions in your life deserve to begin and to end with prayer. To begin with a prayer that says, Lord, show me the way that you would have me go. And end with, Lord, this is what I have decided. May it be your will. Sometimes I would ask my high school students if they were struggling with college decisions. I would say, well, have you prayed about where God wants you to go to college? If you want to get a funny look from a high school senior, ask them if they've prayed about where they're going to go to college. Because most of them will say, well, no, why would I pray about where I'm going to college? My response is, why wouldn't you pray about where you're going to college? Why wouldn't you pray about whether or not you're supposed to date somebody? Why wouldn't you pray about whether or not you should get engaged to somebody? Why wouldn't you pray about whether you should change jobs right now? Why wouldn't you pray about leaving or entering a new relationship? Why wouldn't you pray about taking on a new challenge or venture at work as much as you would pray about taking on a challenge or a new venture at home or at church? Plans begin and end with prayer. And certainly for our graduate today, we should be in prayer. And we should ask her, what are your plans? But this morning I want to flip this question around and pose it to you all. What are your plans? What are your plans today? Specifically, what are your plans to be for the next generation of kids? For the next graduates who will come through this place? Now, let me stop right here and make sure you hear one thing very clearly. I do not mean in the next 5 minutes to criticize anyone. When I was here in November, I walked in the door and looked and was shocked at the number of kids who were sitting in the sanctuary. I haven't looked at the numbers exactly, but you all, percentage-wise, are one of our youngest churches in all of Pittsburgh Presbytery because of the number of kids that you have sitting in your pews. There are congregations that are double your size that would love to have that many kids at a children's sermon in June. I'm serious. And I know that you have made intentional and strategic efforts to make sure that your youth are well funded and supported. And your pastor Laura gets my award for being the solo pastor who still comes to retreats at Crestfield with her kids. So there is no criticism in these next couple minutes for any of you. You are a shining example of a church that is for the kids of your congregation. But my challenge to you is, what are you doing personally? What are your plans? Are you willing today to offer yourself to God and say, I want to be for the next generation? We as a church want to be for the next generation. Because something funny happens when you decide that you are going to be for the next generation. Something funny happens when you decide that these kids are going to be our kids. These kids, those kids, become my kids. A couple years ago, we restructured the youth group of the church that I served at. And we restructured it, and I assigned each and every one of my adult leaders a group of about 6 to 8 kids. And one of my adult leaders was one of my high school was one of my high school students way back. She's now a young adult. And I assigned her this group of girls. I'm going to level with you because they're never going to hear this. They were nuts. I mean, nuts. Insane. Crazy. Like, not just the, mild behavior problem, off the walls bonkers. Soccer players, actresses, all the collection of weird tendencies you could do, they all had in one small group of 8 girls. Okay? They were nuts. The girls older than them, they thought they were nuts. The kids younger than them thought that class was nuts. They were crazy. Okay? And this small group leader was a very quiet, calm, and reserved person. So I gave this nuts group of girls to this very calm, quiet, and reserved girl. And she said to me after youth group one night, she's like, Ryan, I don't think this is funny. She's like, I don't know if you thought this was funny, but this is not funny. They're insane. What am I supposed to do with them? And one of my other leaders spoke up and she said, Amy, you're right. But they love you. And you love them. And that's all that matters. I didn't have to say anything after that. Take this as a compliment and a challenge. Some churches I talk to come to me and say, hey, Brian, we want to reach out to young families. And I show up in the church and there's not a young family to be seen. That's not you. You've got young families. Look, you've got kids right there. Anybody under the age of 18, just look around. They're right among you. They're sitting next to you. They're a few pews ahead of you. You don't even have to look to find the next generation of kids who needs you to be for them. So I'm going to give you a really simple challenge this morning. I want you, bottom line, to pick a kid. You don't even have to know their name. Red hair, curly kid. Just whatever. God knows. Don't worry about it. I want you to pick a kid. And I just want you to commit today to pray for them. That's it. One day. Today. That's it. That's the bottom line commitment. Pick a kid. Maybe you know their name. Maybe you know their parents' name. Just pick one kid in the life of your church who you are going to pray for today. If you're ready for a little bit more than that, here's my next challenge. I want you to pick one kid, that's it, in your church who you are going to get to know over the next year. Now let me explain how simple this can be. You can start out by saying, I'm going to say hi to that kid intentionally every single Sunday. Do you know how far in the life of a child, a single adult who's not their parent, making an effort to say hi to them every Sunday morning, what an impact that can have on them? That reminds them there's somebody at their church every Sunday who's looking for them when they walk in the door. That's the bottom line. And here is the third challenge. So either pick one kid and pray for them today, pick one kid to get to know over the next year, or here is the biggest challenge of all. Pick a kid, any age, youngest to one of your young adults, and say this: regardless of your plans, I know God's plan is for me to be for you. So I am for you no matter where life leads you. Pick a kid. And just say, you know what? I'm for you. I am for you if you need me. I want to be for you. This week, I had breakfast with one of my former youth group students. I met her when she was in 6th grade, and this week she starts a job at a fancy consulting firm in D.C. We met for breakfast, and I've known her, as I said, for the last 10 years. So that means the awkward teen years, the absolutely insane, crazy 7th grade year, the traumatic breakup with the boyfriend of 8th grade, which in hindsight wasn't really that big of a deal, but it was then. Helping her navigate some difficulties in high school, and finally the vocation and career-shaping years of college. And when we were talking about moving to D.C., we were talking about finding a church. And I was giving her some points on how to find a church and how to seek out a church. And two things stood out to me. Number one, she wanted to find a church. She wanted to find a church. This was a 22-year-old who was concerned about finding a church when she moved. Now, why is that? Well, I can tell you why. It's because in the congregation that she is coming out of, there were numerous adults beyond just me, because I'm gone. Numerous adults who were for her. Numerous adults who knew her name. Numerous adults who every Sunday she showed up at church made sure to greet her. Numerous adults who invested into her, who poured into her, who encouraged her, who supported her, who helped her along the way. And she knows that. And she's experienced that, and it has made her faith real in her life. Yesterday, I sent her a text. And it said this. It said, "Hey, I've been thinking back on our conversation this week, and I just have to say, I am darn proud of you. You're a smart young woman with a good head on your shoulders. You're more than ready for the many challenges that adulting," by the way, that's a verb now, adulting. It means to function as an adult. The many challenging, all the kids use it these days, for the many challenges that adulting will bring. I just sent this out of the blue, right? I just sent it out of the blue. I actually had thought about sending it the day of, but for some reason I didn't. And I thought of sending it a couple days later, and I didn't. And yesterday I finally was like, oh, shoot, I forgot to text Haley. I need to send her a text. I sent her the text. 2 hours later. "Oh my gosh, Brian, thank you so much. I just finished unpacking my apartment. My parents have just left, and I got your text. You have no idea how much this means to me. Thank you." Now look, I didn't move heaven and earth for this kid. I sent her a text. I was sitting at Carpet Funscapes during a 7-year-old's birthday party yesterday. Okay? Right? This was not a major effort for me to be encouraging for her. Right? But something prompted me to do it, and I did it. And the outcome was far greater than I ever could have anticipated. So, let me ask you this. Picture you're a kid. You're 11 years old. Adolescence has begun, and you're starting to have feelings that are just not pleasant. They're sad. They're dark. They're scary. They are, we recognize, depression and anxiety, but they don't have the words for them yet. You wake up on a Sunday morning and you're 11 years old and you check your phone and you find out that there was a party last night that you weren't invited to because there's a photo of it on Instagram. Your mom and dad helped you get ready for church and you go to church. And you come to church and nobody says hi to you the whole time except your mom and dad. And then you walk out the door and you go home. Or picture this. You wake up that morning, you see that picture of the party you weren't invited to last night. And you go to church. And as soon as you walk in the door, somebody says your name, shakes your hand, and tells you, "I'm glad you're here today." And you walk in and you sit down in a pew. And somebody in the pew behind you reaches up and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here today." You go, at the end of the service, you go down to fellowship hour. And somebody else comes up to you and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And then you walk out of the doors of that church. Can you imagine the difference 3 people saying hi to that 11-year-old girl can make? I just wonder how much different kids' lives today would be if there were more adults who decided, "Hey, I am for you." If the kids who struggle with depression and anxiety, it's not a magic fix. I'm not saying that. But for kids who struggle, if there were more adults who said, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, I'm glad you're here," who said their name, if it wouldn't be a little bit different. My friends, you have a wonderful gift. You have wonderful gifts that God has entrusted to you in the lives of your children, in the lives of your teenagers, in the lives of your young adults. My question for you is simply this. What are your plans? Instead of asking them what their plans are, I ask you, what are your plans? What are your plans this day to be for the next generation. So I challenge you. Pick a kid and pray for them today. Pick a kid who you're going to get to know, who you're going to get to say hi to every Sunday they're here. Or, if you're ready for it, pick a kid and say, you know what, kid, I am going to be for you. And get to know them over the next year. So what are your plans? What are your plans? How are you today going to be for the next generation? Because I wonder how many kids' lives would be just a little bit different, a little bit stronger, a little bit better if they had a few adults who said, you know what? I am for